I watched my family enjoy their Christmas dinner from a distance while I stood outside in the cold. I shared my only sandwich with a trembling dog nearby, trying to distract myself from the ache in my chest. That's when I noticed something unusual, a diamond tag on the dog's collar. Curious, I dialed the number engraved on it. Minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up out of nowhere. A well-dressed butler stepped out and explained that the dog belonged to a disabled billionaire I had cared for years ago. When he saw me, his reaction changed my Christmas night and my life forever. I'm glad you're here with me. Stay with my story until the end, and tell me the city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey reaches. My name is Flora. I'm 68 years old, and I thought I had learned to expect very little from my family. But nothing prepared me for Christmas Eve 2024. The night my own son made it clear I wasn't welcome at my grandson's very first Christmas dinner. The call came 3 days earlier. "Mom, about Christmas dinner," Trent began, using that careful tone I'd come to recognize, the one he used when he was about to say something I wouldn't like. He explained that Miranda's parents were flying in from Connecticut, along with her sister and brother-in-law. The dining room only seated 8 comfortably, especially with the baby's high chair. He paused, as if the numbers explained everything. I suggested I could sit in the living room. I didn't need a place at the main table. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. There was a pause, and I could hear Miranda speaking sharply in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. "It's just complicated this year," Trent finally said. "Maybe we can get together the day after Christmas. Just the 4 of us." The 4 of us, as if I were a distant acquaintance instead of his mother. As if I hadn't spent 37 Christmases making sure he had everything under the tree, even in years when I had to choose between groceries and electricity. I told him I understood, but I didn't. Not really. On Christmas Eve morning, I woke up to silence. No excited calls about last-minute plans. No request to bring my sweet potato casserole, the one Trent used to beg for every year. Just quiet. I dressed carefully in my best navy blue dress, the one I wore to Trent's wedding 5 years ago. It hung a little looser now. Since retiring, I'd been stretching my $950 monthly pension as far as it would go, and the weight loss showed. Still, the dress looked dignified, respectable. I couldn't bear the thought of spending Christmas alone in my apartment, staring at a small artificial tree decorated with ornaments my grandson would never see. So I decided to drive to Trent's neighborhood, just to look at the lights, just to feel connected somehow. Maplewood Estates was only 20 minutes away, lined with houses glowing like jewels against the December night. Every window framed a perfect scene: children in pajamas, parents laughing, grandparents holding babies. The kind of holiday picture that felt impossibly distant from my own life. Trent's house stood on Elm Street, a colonial-style home he and Miranda had bought 3 years earlier. I remembered how proud he'd been when they showed it to me, the granite countertops, the spacious bathroom with the deep soaking tub. I'd congratulated him, even as I quietly wondered how they managed it on his sales salary. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and watched. Through the dining room window, I saw them gathered around the polished table Miranda's mother had gifted them. Miranda, graceful in a red silk blouse, held Tommy while her father carved a perfectly golden turkey. Trent sat at the head of the table, laughing at something Miranda's brother said. Her mother poured wine that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. They looked like a picture-perfect holiday ad. Everyone smiling, everyone included, everyone belonging. Then I noticed the empty chair at the foot of the table. A 9th chair, pulled slightly back, as if someone had just stepped away. For a brief, foolish moment, I wondered if it was meant for me, if Trent might call and invite me in after all. But then Miranda's sister took that seat, and I understood it had never been for me. I don't know how long I sat there watching through that warm, glowing window, long enough for my hands to go numb despite the heater running, long enough to see them bring out what looked like a homemade pie, the kind of dessert I never had time or money to make, and in that moment, sitting alone in my car, I realized just how invisible I had become. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped out of the car, telling myself I'd just walk around the block to clear my head before going home. The sidewalks were mostly clear, but thin patches of ice reflected the streetlights, making everything look delicate and uncertain. As I passed Trent's house, laughter spilled out into the night-warm, effortless laughter. The kind I remembered from when Trent was little, when it was just the two of us, before he learned to feel embarrassed by our small apartment and my worn-out clothes. I made it 3 blocks before I had to stop, not because I was tired, but because my chest felt so tight it was hard to breathe. I sat down on a bench in the small neighborhood park, closed my eyes, and tried to remember when things between us had shifted. When had I become someone my own son didn't want seen? When had my love turned into something merely tolerated instead of cherished? The wind grew stronger, cutting straight through my wool coat. I should have gone home then. I should have driven back to my apartment, heated up the soup I'd planned for dinner, put on an old holiday movie, and gone to bed early. But instead, I stayed there, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. That's when I heard it. A soft sound at first, so faint I thought it was just the wind. Then I heard it again, a quiet, desperate whimper coming from beneath the bench beside me. I leaned over and saw him. A small dog, maybe 20 pounds, with golden fur clumped together by snow and ice. He was shaking so badly his whole body trembled. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered as I knelt on the frozen ground. "What are you doing out here all alone?" He looked up at me with dark brown eyes that seemed full of sadness. He wore a collar, but no leash, clearly someone's pet, either lost or left behind on Christmas Eve. I reached into my purse and pulled out the ham sandwich I'd packed earlier, just in case I got hungry while driving around. It wasn't much plain white bread, a few slices of ham, a little mustard, but it was all I had. "Are you hungry?" I asked softly, as I unwrapped it and tore off a small piece of ham. His tail twitched, then gave a cautious wag as he edged closer. When I held the food out, he took it gently from my fingers, barely using his teeth. Even hungry, he had such good manners. I fed him the whole sandwich piece by piece, talking to him quietly the entire time, telling him he was a good boy and that someone must be missing him very much. As I gave him the last bite, I finally looked closely at his collar. It wasn't ordinary at all. It was made of what looked like fine leather, with small metal details that caught the streetlight, and hanging from it was something that made me blink in disbelief. A diamond. Not glass, not decoration. A real diamond, about the size of a dime, set in what looked like platinum. I glanced around the empty park, suddenly feeling like I'd stepped into a strange storybook scene. Who puts a diamond on a dog's collar? And how did a dog like this end up alone in a quiet suburban park on Christmas Eve? After he finished eating, he climbed up onto the bench beside me and leaned against my side, his warmth seeping through my coat. For the first time all day, I felt like someone actually wanted to be with me. "What's your story, huh?" I murmured, gently stroking his damp fur. "And what are we supposed to do now?" As if he understood, he lifted his head and met my eyes. And for the first time since Trent's call 3 days earlier, I felt something other than rejection and sadness. I felt needed. The diamond flashed again under the streetlight, and when I leaned closer, I noticed something else, a small metal tag tucked behind it. A phone number was engraved in tiny, precise letters. My hands began to shake as I pulled out my phone. I wasn't sure if it was the cold or something else entirely, something that felt like hope, though I couldn't explain why. The dog pressed against me a little harder, as if he sensed that whatever came next mattered. I stared at the number for a long moment before finding the courage to dial. My fingers were numb, and it took 3 tries to press the right buttons. The phone rang once, twice. On the 3rd ring, a calm, professional voice answered, "Wellington Residence, Maxwell speaking." I almost hung up. It sounded unreal, like a line from a movie, not the kind of call a retired nurse from a small apartment was meant to make. "Hello?" I said finally, my voice barely steady. "I found a dog. This number was on his collar." There was a brief pause, and then the man's tone changed completely. "Ma'am, could you please describe the dog?" "He's small, golden fur, very gentle," I said. "I found him in Riverside Park. He was cold and hungry." "Oh, thank goodness," Maxwell replied, and I could hear real relief in his voice. "This is very important. Where are you right now? Are you safe? Is Charlie with you?" Charlie. So that was his name. "Yes," I said. "We're both fine. We're still in the park on Elm Street. Please don't move," he said quickly. "I'm sending someone to pick you both up right away. May I have your name?" "Flora," I answered without hesitation. "Flora Henderson," he repeated, then added gently, "Mrs. Henderson, thank you so much for calling. You have no idea how worried we've been. Please stay exactly where you are. Someone will be with you in less than 10 minutes." The call ended, leaving me staring at my phone in a daze. I looked down at Charlie, who now sat calmly beside me, as if none of this were unusual. "What have I gotten myself into, Charlie?" I murmured. He wagged his tail and licked my hand, and somehow that small gesture made me feel steadier. Just as Maxwell promised, 8 minutes later, headlights appeared at the park entrance. But it wasn't just any car. A black Mercedes glided silently toward us, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies or passing on the highway. It stopped directly in front of my bench. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out who looked like he belonged to another era. He wore a perfectly fitted black coat, leather gloves, and a chauffeur's cap. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and a posture that suggested years of strict discipline. "Mrs. Henderson?" he asked, walking toward us with calm precision. I recognized the voice immediately. "Maxwell." "Yes," I said, rising slowly. Charlie stayed close to my legs, his tail wagging faster now, as if he recognized him. Then Maxwell did something that nearly took my breath away. He bowed. Not a polite nod, but a proper bow, as though I were someone important instead of an elderly woman in a worn coat sitting in a public park. "I cannot properly express how grateful Mr. Wellington will be," he said, "that you found Charlie and kept him safe." Mr. Wellington. The name sent a strange chill through me, though I couldn't explain why. "Is Mr. Wellington Charlie's owner?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. He's been deeply distressed. Charlie has never run off before. Mr. Wellington feared the worst." As Maxwell spoke, Charlie trotted over to him, accepting gentle pats. I studied Maxwell's face and sensed there was more to this than a missing dog. "How did Charlie get lost?" I asked. His expression became carefully neutral. "There was an incident earlier this evening. Charlie was startled during his walk and ran. We've had people searching for him for hours." People. Searching. For a dog. I glanced again at the diamond on Charlie's collar and began to understand that Mr. Wellington was no ordinary man. "Mrs. Henderson," Maxwell continued, "Mr. Wellington would very much like to thank you in person if you're willing. He's waiting at the house." I looked at the Mercedes, then at Maxwell, then down at Charlie's trusting brown eyes. "That really isn't necessary," I said slowly. "I'm just glad Charlie is safe. I should probably go home." Maxwell hesitated. "Ma'am, I believe you should know something. Mr. Wellington specifically asked me to tell you that he's been hoping to meet you for a very long time." My heart seemed to stop. "I'm sorry. What?" "He's hoped to meet you again, ma'am. For many years." The words hung in the cold air. None of this made sense. I was certain I'd never met anyone named Wellington, certainly not someone wealthy enough to put diamonds on a dog's collar. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I've never met any Mr. Wellington." Maxwell's expression softened. "With respect, ma'am, I believe you have. It was quite some time ago, and he went by a different name then." A different name. My thoughts raced as I searched my memory, trying to imagine who I might have known who could have ended up living this kind of life. Nothing came to mind. "Mrs. Henderson," Maxwell said gently, "Mr. Wellington was a patient of yours at Harrison General Hospital about 15 years ago." The words hit me hard. Harrison General. I had worked there for 12 years before budget cuts eliminated my position. I'd cared for hundreds of patients, maybe thousands. "I looked after many patients," I said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Maxwell replied, "but he remembers you clearly. He's never forgotten the kindness you showed him during a very difficult time." I tried to picture him, but after so many years, faces and names blurred together unless something truly stood out. "He remembers me?" I asked. "Very much so. He's spoken of you often. He tried to find you several times, but you had moved, and your old number was no longer active." The whole situation felt unreal. Someone I had once cared for had remembered me all these years. Someone had been looking for me. "Ma'am," Maxwell said, glancing at his watch, "it's Christmas Eve, and it's very cold. Mr. Wellington is waiting, and I know he would be honored if you allowed me to meet him, even if only for a few minutes." I looked around the empty park. I thought about my quiet apartment and the can of soup waiting for me. Then I thought about Trent and Miranda, about the perfect family dinner I would never be invited to, and suddenly I realized I had nothing to lose. "All right," I heard myself say, "I'll meet him." For the first time, Maxwell's face softened into a genuine smile. "Wonderful, ma'am, if you'll allow me." He opened the back door of the Mercedes, and I caught my first glimpse inside. Cream-colored leather seats, polished wood accents, and warmth that felt richer than anything I'd known in years. Charlie jumped in first, curling up comfortably as if this were completely normal. I followed, sinking into the seat, amazed at how soft it felt. Maxwell closed the door quietly and returned to the driver's seat. The car moved off so smoothly I barely noticed the engine start. "Where are we going?" I asked as we left the park. "Not far," Maxwell replied, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "About 20 minutes, Lakeshore Drive." I knew the name. That was where the truly wealthy lived: large homes, private docks, gates, security, not places meant for people like me. As we drove through increasingly grand neighborhoods, Maxwell chatted politely about the weather and Charlie's routines. Still, I sensed something beneath his calm professionalism. Anticipation, maybe. "Maxwell," I asked at last, "what is Mr. Wellington's first name? It might help me remember." His smile appeared again in the mirror. "Of course, ma'am. His name is Dean Wellington." The name struck me like a flash of lightning. Suddenly, I was back in room 412 at Harrison General 15 years earlier. A man in his late 30s, paralyzed after a car accident. Angry, bitter, certain his life was over. His family had visited at first, then less and less, until they stopped coming altogether. Back then, his name had been Dean Morrison. I remembered him clearly now. How could I have forgotten? He'd been one of my most difficult patients, not because of his condition, but because of his anger. He shouted, refused care, lashed out. Most of the staff dreaded being assigned to him, everyone except me. I had seen something others missed. Not anger, but fear. The fear of a man who believed he had lost everything that defined him. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Dean." "Yes, ma'am," Maxwell said quietly. "He's been searching for you for a very long time." Memories rushed back, the long conversations, the nights I stayed late just to listen, the first time he allowed me to read to him, the day he broke down and cried like a child in my arms, and the last time I saw him when he was transferred to long-term care because his insurance had run out. "How is he?" I asked, barely able to speak. Maxwell's smile was bright with pride. "Dean Wellington is one of the most successful men in the state, but more importantly, he's one of the happiest. And he says that's because of a nurse named Flora Henderson who refused to give up on him when everyone else did." The car turned into a long, winding driveway lined with trees wrapped in thousands of tiny lights. At the end stood a house that looked straight out of a storybook, elegant, warm, and welcoming. Light glowed from every window. Charlie sat upright now, tail wagging wildly, clearly recognizing home. "Ma'am," Maxwell said as we stopped, "Mr. Wellington wants you to know that finding you tonight feels like a Christmas miracle. Charlie running off, ending up in that exact park at the exact moment you were there. He doesn't believe in coincidences." As Maxwell stepped out to open my door, the front door of the house opened. A figure stood silhouetted against the warm light inside. Even from a distance, even after 15 years, I knew it was Dean. And I knew, without a doubt, that my life was about to change. The man in the doorway was not the broken, furious patient I remembered. This Dean Wellington stood tall and confident. I noticed the wheelchair behind him in the foyer, but it didn't define him. He wore a fine sweater and dark slacks, his hair silvered at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished. But his eyes were the same deep blue I remembered. The eyes that once burned with anger, then slowly filled with hope. "Flora," he said, my name sounding like a prayer. "It's really you." Maxwell offered his arm, and I accepted it, grateful because my legs no longer felt steady. Charlie leapt from the car and rushed to Dean, who reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Hello, Dean," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't believe you're standing," I said, hardly trusting my own eyes. Dean smiled, that familiar crooked smile I remembered so well, only now it carried no bitterness. "It took 5 years of physical therapy, 3 experimental surgeries, and more determination than I ever thought I had. But you taught me something important, that giving up guarantees nothing will change." "You were told you'd never walk again," I said softly. "I was told many things," he replied, taking a careful step forward. His movements were slow but steady. "Doctors said I'd never regain feeling below my waist. Insurance companies decided I wasn't worth the cost of experimental treatment. My own family told me to accept my limits and be grateful for what I still had." He stopped a few feet from me, close enough for me to see the fine lines around his eyes, proof of the years that had passed since our days at Harrison General. "But there was one nurse," he continued, "who told me something different. She said my body might be broken, but my spirit wasn't. And as long as my spirit was intact, anything was possible." "Do you remember saying that, Flora?" I did. It had been one of his darkest days. He hadn't eaten. He wouldn't speak. I'd sat beside his bed for hours in that uncomfortable plastic chair, talking about nothing at all, until he finally asked why I kept coming back when everyone else had given up. "I remember," I whispered. "That conversation changed my life," Dean said simply. "Not just because of the words, but because you believed them. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Maxwell cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should continue inside. It's quite cold and Mrs. Henderson has had a long evening." Dean flushed slightly. "Of course. Flora, please come in. Let me make you some tea or coffee, whatever you like." The inside of the house was even more beautiful than the outside. The living room felt elegant, yet warm, with a fire crackling in the fireplace and furniture chosen for comfort rather than display. Photos lined the mantel with friends and colleagues, but no close family. Charlie immediately jumped onto what was clearly his favorite spot on the leather sofa. "This is lovely," I said, and I meant it. Despite the wealth around me, the space felt genuine, lived in. "Thank you," Dean said. "After spending so much time in sterile hospital rooms, I wanted a place that felt alive." He motioned to 2 chairs by the fire. "Please sit. I'll get you something warm." As I lowered myself into a chair that likely cost more than my monthly pension, I watched him move about the open kitchen. His motions were careful but confident. The counters were slightly lower, everything arranged thoughtfully within reach. "You know," I said as he prepared what smelled like very good coffee, "I wondered about you over the years. After you were transferred, I tried to find out what happened, but privacy rules." "I know," he said, bringing over a tray with coffee and what looked like homemade cookies. "I tried to find you too. When I finally left that facility and started rebuilding my life, you were the first person I wanted to thank. But you'd left the hospital, and no one could tell me where you'd gone." He sat across from me with the ease of someone who had learned how to move through the world differently and well. "I even hired private investigators," he added. I stared at him. "You did what?" He nodded. "Flora Henderson isn't a rare name. I only knew you lived somewhere in the city. That's all I had." "You hired investigators? To find me?" I asked, stunned. "Flora," he said quietly, Leaning forward, "You saved my life. Not medically. Others could give medications and check charts. You saved me by refusing to let me disappear into despair." His eyes held mine. "Do you know what it meant to have someone sit with me during those panic attacks? To read to me when I couldn't focus? To believe I was worth fighting for when my own family had already moved on?" My cheeks burned. "I was just doing my job." "No," he said firmly. "You were doing far more than your job. I remember the night supervisor telling you that you didn't need to spend so much time in my room, that other patients needed attention too, and you told her that every patient deserved to feel like they mattered." The memory rushed back. Supervisor Jenkins, always focused on efficiency, questioning why I spent so much time with difficult patients. "I also remember," Dean continued, "the day you brought your own books because the hospital library had nothing I liked, and the afternoon you stayed 3 hours past your shift because I was struggling with the anniversary of my accident." I had forgotten about the books, but now I saw them clearly, my own worn paperbacks, chosen carefully for him. "You spent your own money on my care," Dean said softly. "The books, the special pillow you bought because the hospital ones hurt my neck, the magazines you picked up on your way to work. You never asked for anything back." "They were small things," I said, trying to wave it away. "They were everything," he replied gently. "Small things that together became the difference between giving up and holding on." Dean reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn paperback. "I still have this," he said softly. "The biography of Franklin Roosevelt you gave me when I was angry about being in a wheelchair. Do you remember what you wrote inside?" I shook my head. He opened the cover and read, his voice thick with emotion. "Dear Dean, FDR changed the world from a wheelchair. Your accident does not define your limits. Your courage does. With admiration and hope, Flora." My hands flew to my mouth. I had completely forgotten writing those words. "I read this book 17 times, Dean said. "Every time I wanted to quit therapy or walk away from experimental treatments, I read your note again." We sat quietly for a moment, the fire crackling softly. Charlie slept on the sofa, snoring gently. "Dean," I asked at last, "what happened to your family?" "I remember they visited at the beginning." His expression dimmed. "They came less and less once it was clear I wasn't going to recover quickly. My parents felt I was becoming too much of a burden. My sister had her own life, and my fiancé—" He paused. "She decided this wasn't what she had signed up for." "I'm so sorry," I said. "Don't be," he replied calmly. At the time, it hurt deeply, but it forced me to figure out who I was when everything else was taken away, and it made me value the people who stayed. Like you. "But I didn't stay," I said quietly. "I was reassigned when you were transferred." "You stayed where it mattered," Dean said. "You gave me something to hold on to when I had nothing. And when I finally stood on my own again, literally, I promised myself I would find you and thank you properly." He gestured around the room. "Everything I built started with what you gave me in that hospital room, the belief that I was worth fighting for." "What did you build?" I asked. "Technology," he said. "After rehab, I used my settlement money to start a software company. Being forced to navigate the world differently gave me insight into creating technology that actually works for people." He smiled with quiet pride. "Wellington Technologies now employs over 2,000 people. We develop accessibility software for major companies. Making technology better for people with disabilities ends up making it better for everyone." I stared at him, struggling to connect this confident man with the broken patient I once knew. "But more than that," he continued, "I tried to pass on what you gave me. We support employees during medical crises. We help patients when insurance runs out. And we fund scholarships for children of single mothers working in healthcare." My breath caught. "Children of women who work long shifts caring for other families," he said gently. His eyes met mine. "I know you raised your son alone. I know you worked double shifts to survive. I know how much you gave." Tears blurred my vision. "How do you know all that?" "I told you," he said softly. I looked for you. I learned about your life, your sacrifices, your dedication. He paused. I learned you never remarried after your husband passed, that you worked multiple jobs while putting yourself through nursing school, that you never missed a shift, even when you were sick, because you couldn't afford to. I felt exposed, like every quiet struggle had been laid bare. And I learned, he continued gently, that you were forced into early retirement, and that you're living on a pension that barely stretches far enough. Shame washed over me. Sitting in this beautiful home, across from a man who had built an empire, my own life suddenly felt painfully small. Flora, Dean said, and his voice made me lift my head. I didn't have you found to judge you. I did it because I wanted to help you the way you helped me. He held my gaze. I've waited 15 years for the chance to give back what you gave me. I don't understand, I said quietly. Dean smiled, and it was the same smile I remembered from the day he first took steps with his physical therapist, pure joy mixed with determination. Flora Henderson, he said, I'd like to offer you a job. I stared at him stunned. A job? Not just any job, he replied, leaning forward with energy. Director of Patient Advocacy for the Wellington Foundation. You would oversee our hospital partnership program and make sure patients who can't afford long-term care don't slip through the cracks the way I almost did. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Director of Patient Advocacy. The title alone sounded far beyond anything I had ever imagined for myself. Dean, I don't understand, I said at last. I'm 68. I've been retired for 6 years. I'm not qualified for something like that. Flora, he said gently but firmly, you're the most qualified person I know. You have 40 years of nursing experience. You understand healthcare from the ground up. And more than anything, you have the heart for it. You see people, not charts or numbers. I shook my head, overwhelmed. But I don't have a degree in administration or business. I don't care about degrees, Dean interrupted. I care about character. I care about someone who will fight for patients the way you fought for me. He paused, then added calmly, the salary would be $8,500 a month, plus full health benefits and a housing allowance. The number echoed in my mind. More than 4 times my pension. More than I had ever earned in my life. That's too much, I said automatically. I couldn't possibly be worth that. Dean's expression turned serious. Flora, let me tell you something about worth. Do you remember the night I refused my pain medication because I said I deserved to suffer? I remembered. It had been one of his darkest nights. You sat with me for 4 hours, he said. You didn't argue or lecture. You talked to me about pain, physical and emotional, and how healing required courage, not punishment. The memory came back clearly. I had told him about other patients, about losing my husband, about choosing to keep living fully instead of letting grief consume me. That night, Dean continued, I took the medication. But more importantly, I began to believe my life still had value, even if it wasn't what I'd planned. He stood and picked up a framed photograph from the mantel, then handed it to me. It showed a much younger Dean in a hospital bed, thin but smiling. Standing beside him was a nurse in scrubs me. My therapist took this, Dean said. It was the first time I smiled after the accident. You had just finished reading that chapter about fear. I stared at the photo, remembering how afraid he'd been of losing progress, of hope fading again. I keep this here, Dean said softly, because it reminds me when my real recovery began, not physical recovery hope. I set the photo down carefully. Dean, you would have found that hope anyway. No, he said firmly. I was broken, completely. I had already decided to stop treatments. That shocked me. I hadn't known. You changed that, he continued, not with big speeches, with small, steady kindness. He smiled. Do you remember the puzzle? I did. A 1,000-piece lighthouse puzzle. I worked on it for months, he said. You checked my progress every shift. You celebrated every small victory. And when I finished, you brought me a cupcake and said every achievement mattered. I remembered that cupcake. It had cost me more than I could afford. That puzzle taught me something important, Dean said. Recovery isn't about going back. It's about building something new, piece by piece. He sat back down, looking at me steadily, as if waiting for me to understand just how much those small moments had meant. Flora, you gave me the tools I needed to rebuild my life. What I'm offering you isn't charity, it's an investment. I want you to help others the way you helped me. Tears welled up again. But what if I'm not good at it? What if I fail? Then you learn and try again, Dean said calmly. Just like I did in physical therapy. I didn't succeed by playing it safe. I succeeded by taking chances on the right people. And you are the right person. I looked around the room, trying to take it all in. Where would I even work? I don't have a car that could get me to an office every day. The foundation has offices here in the house, Dean replied. And Maxwell can drive you whenever needed. Honestly, much of the work can be done from home, if that's what you prefer. My head was spinning. That morning, I'd been a lonely retiree with $37 in my checking account. Now, my entire life was being rewritten. There's something else, Dean said quietly. The foundation owns a small house about 2 miles from here. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a garden. It's usually for visiting researchers, but it's been empty for months. You could live there rent-free as part of your compensation. A house. He was offering me a house. Dean, this is too much, I said quickly. You don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job. Stop, he said gently but firmly. Stop minimizing what you did. You didn't just do your job. You gave your time, your money, and your emotional strength to help a stranger survive the worst moment of his life. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Do you want to know what else my investigators learned about you? I hesitated, then nodded. They learned that you worked extra shifts for 3 years to help pay for your son's college, even when he barely spoke to you. They learned you've sent your grandson birthday cards for 5 years, even though they're always returned unopened. They learned you volunteered at a free clinic every Saturday for 8 years until your arthritis made it too painful. Each sentence felt like a blow to my chest. And they learned, Dean continued softly, that you spent last Christmas alone because your son said there wasn't room for you at his family dinner. I looked up sharply. How could you possibly know that? Because I hired people who are very good at finding the truth, he said gently. Flora, you've spent your entire adult life caring for others, and no one has cared for you. That ends now. My chest tightened. You don't understand. My relationship with my son is complicated. I wasn't always there when he was growing up. I was working so much. Maybe I deserve— You deserve nothing but respect, Dean interrupted firmly. You worked multiple jobs to give your child stability. You sacrificed your comfort so he could have opportunities. His inability to appreciate that says nothing about you. The sob broke free despite my efforts to hold it back. Years of guilt and quiet self-blame poured out. Dean moved to the sofa and patted the seat beside him. Come here. I sat down and he handed me a box of tissues. Flora, he said gently, this may be hard to hear. Your son doesn't value you not because you failed, but because he never had to experience real hardship. You worked so hard to protect him that he never learned the cost of sacrifice. I wiped my eyes. He's not a bad person. He takes you for granted, Dean finished, and that's not acceptable. You raised him, you supported him, you loved him without conditions. His choices reflect him, not you. We sat quietly for a few moments. Charlie's soft snoring filled the room. Outside, snow drifted down again, but inside, by the fire, I felt warmer than I had in years. Flora, Dean said at last, I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you happy with your life right now? I thought about my small apartment, the silent days, holidays spent alone, choosing between groceries and medication, feeling invisible. No, I whispered. I'm not happy. Then let me help you change that, Dean said. Take the job, move into the house, Let yourself feel valued again." I looked at him, this man who had once been broken and angry, now offering me a future I never thought possible. "What if your investigators are wrong about me?" I asked softly. "What if I'm not as good as you think?" Dean smiled. "Flora, do you know how I knew it was you who found Charlie tonight?" I shook my head. "Because only someone with your heart would sit in a freezing park on Christmas Eve and give their last sandwich to a lost dog," Dean said softly. "Charlie didn't run off by accident. I let him go, hoping he'd lead me to someone kind enough to help him. I've been doing it for months, trying to find you." My mouth fell open. "You've been using Charlie to find me?" "I knew you lived somewhere nearby," he said, his eyes bright with quiet humor, "and I knew that if our paths crossed, you'd be the kind of person who would stop for a helpless animal. I just didn't expect it to happen on Christmas Eve. That part really was a miracle." I stared at him, stunned. "So this whole thing was planned?" "Not planned," he corrected gently. "Hoped for. I hoped that the woman who saved my life 15 years ago would still be the kind of person who would help a stranger on the coldest night of the year." He reached for my hand and held it, and I was right. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever, the feeling of being truly wanted, truly valued, truly seen. "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "Yes, I'll take the job." Dean's smile lit up his entire face. "Welcome to the Wellington Foundation, Director Henderson." The next morning, I woke up in what Dean called the guest suite. The bedroom was larger than my entire apartment, with tall windows overlooking a garden dusted in fresh snow. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then everything from Christmas Eve came rushing back: the offer, the house, the chance to start over at 68. It almost felt unreal in the clear light of morning. A gentle knock came at the door. "Mrs. Henderson," Maxwell said kindly, "Mr. Wellington wanted me to let you know that breakfast is ready whenever you are." I glanced down at the clothes I'd slept in and suddenly felt awkward and out of place. "Thank you, Maxwell. I'll be right down." When I entered the kitchen, I found Dean at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease while checking a pan beside him. Charlie sat nearby, watching intently. "Good morning," Dean said warmly. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," I admitted. The bed had felt impossibly comfortable, and for the first time in years I hadn't woken up worrying about bills. "Perfect," he said. "I made blueberry pancakes. Well, I call them famous, but really only Charlie and Maxwell have tried them." He pointed to a seat at the island. "Coffee's fresh, and there's juice if you'd rather." As I sat down, I watched him move around the thoughtfully designed kitchen. Everything was arranged to support balance and ease, but nothing felt clinical. It simply felt intentional. "Dean," I said as he placed a stack of golden pancakes in front of me, "last night meant more to me than I can explain. But I've been thinking, I'm not sure I'm the right person for this job." He paused, syrup bottle in hand. "Why do you say that?" "I've never worked with foundations or administration. I've never managed anything bigger than a nursing shift. What if I disappoint you?" Dean set the bottle down and looked at me seriously. "Can I tell you about my first day as CEO?" I nodded, cutting into the pancakes. "I had no idea what I was doing," he said with a quiet laugh. "My first board meeting was a mess. I forgot half the agenda, mispronounced a major client's name, and nearly lost a contract." "What happened?" I asked. "The board wanted to replace me," he said. "But my mentor pulled me aside and told me something I never forgot. He said competence can be taught, character can't. He invested in who I was, not what I knew." Dean reached across the counter and gently touched my hand. "Flora, I'm not hiring your resume. I'm hiring your heart. Everything else can be learned." I hesitated. "But what if the board disagrees?" "Then they'll learn I don't make mistakes about people," he said calmly. "And besides, I am the board. The foundation is funded entirely by my company. I answer only to my conscience." After breakfast, Dean showed me the foundation offices in the east wing of the house. The space was welcoming, filled with soft light, comfortable chairs, and walls covered in handwritten thank you letters from families the foundation had helped. "This will be your office," Dean said, opening the door to a bright corner room with windows on two sides. "If you want to change anything, just tell Maxwell." I stepped inside, overwhelmed not by luxury, but by purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing. I was needed. I walked over to the window and looked out at the snow-covered garden. It was peaceful and beautiful, but doubt still tugged at me. "Dean, are you really sure about the salary? $8,500 a month feels like a lot for someone who's still figuring things out." Dean joined me by the window. "Last year, Wellington Technologies brought in $450 million in revenue. The foundation's annual budget is $12 million. Your salary is less than 1% of what we give away." He looked at me steadily. "You're not expensive, Flora. You're an investment." That afternoon, Maxwell drove me back to my apartment so I could pack. The difference between my small, worn place and Dean's elegant home was almost painful, and I felt embarrassed knowing Maxwell would see how little I owned. "Mrs. Henderson," he said gently as we climbed the narrow stairs to my second-floor unit, "Mr. Wellington was truly overjoyed to find you last night. In all my years with him, I've never seen him that happy." "You've worked with him a long time?" I asked. 12 years, Maxwell replied. "Since shortly after he started the company. He's like a son to me. My own children live far away. And when my wife passed 5 years ago?" He paused, clearing his throat. "Mr. Wellington made sure I wasn't alone." I unlocked the door and stepped inside, suddenly seeing my apartment through someone else's eyes. The furniture was old but tidy. The walls needed paint. Everything spoke of careful budgeting, not comfort. "He's lucky to have you," I said as I began gathering my few treasured belongings, photo albums, my mother's china, the books I'd carried from home to home. "Ma'am, if I may," Maxwell said quietly, "Mr. Wellington has spoken of you often. You're something of a legend in our house." I looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "He tells every new employee about you," Maxwell said. "How you saw his potential when no one else did. How you treated him like someone worth fighting for." His voice softened. "He says you taught him that real wealth isn't money, but how much good you do for others." My throat tightened. "I just treated him the way everyone deserves to be treated." "Exactly," Maxwell said, "and that's why you're perfect for this role." In less than 2 hours, everything I owned fit into the back of Dean's Mercedes. As Maxwell loaded the last box, I took one final look at the apartment that had been my home for 6 years. When I handed my keys to the landlord and told him I wouldn't be renewing the lease, he simply grunted and wrote something in his ledger. No goodbye, no acknowledgement, just another tenant gone. The house Dean had offered me was even better than he'd described. Built in the 1920s, it had warm hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen overlooking a small, well-kept garden. There was a cozy window seat that felt like it had been waiting for quiet afternoons and long books. "The foundation covers utilities and maintenance," Dean explained as he showed me around. "Your only job is to make it feel like home." That evening, as I unpacked my few belongings in my spacious new bedroom, my phone rang. Trent's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but old habits won. "Hello, Trent." "Mom, I just drove past your apartment," he said quickly. "There's a "for rent" sign in the window. Where are you?" I realized he must have stopped by, likely to deliver some last-minute gesture of holiday obligation. "I moved," I said simply. "You moved? Where? Why didn't you tell me?" His voice carried a note of panic I hadn't heard since he was a child. I looked around my peaceful room, the snow-covered trees outside the window. "I didn't think you'd be interested." "Of course I'm interested. You're my mother. Where are you living? Do you need help with rent?" The irony almost hurt. Just a day earlier, I'd been invisible. Now that I was no longer convenient, I mattered again. "I don't need help, Trent. I'm fine." "But Mom, you can't afford anything decent on your pension. What kind of place did you rent?" I could hear Miranda's voice in the background, sharp with curiosity. I imagined them realizing they'd lost their dependable fallback. "I got a job," I said calmly. "A very good one. It comes with housing." "A job?" Trent said. "Mom, you're 68. What kind of job?" "Director of Patient Advocacy at the Wellington Foundation." There was a long silence. "Mom," he said carefully, "that sounds impressive. Are you sure it's legitimate? There are scams that target older people." A familiar sting rose in my chest. Even now, his first instinct was doubt. "It's legitimate," I said evenly. "The foundation is run by someone I cared for years ago. He remembered me." "Well, how much does it pay?" Trent asked. For a moment I almost told him, almost shared the number that would change everything. But then I remembered Christmas Eve, sitting alone in the cold while he enjoyed his perfect dinner. "It pays enough," I said instead. "More than enough." "Mom, I really think you should be careful. This sounds too good to be true. Maybe you should come stay with us while you think about it." The offer came too late. 24 hours earlier, I might have accepted with relief. Now it felt empty. "Thank you," I said, "but I'm very happy where I am. I need to go. I start work tomorrow and I want to be rested." And for the first time in a long while, that was completely true. "But Mom, goodbye, Trent. Give my love to Miranda and Tommy." I ended the call before he could say anything else and turned off my phone. Through my bedroom window, I could see the warm lights glowing in Dean's house across the garden. I thought about the man who had remembered a small act of kindness from 15 years earlier, a man who had spent months searching for me, someone who had offered me not just a job, but a chance to matter again. For the first time in years, I fell asleep looking forward to the next day. 6 months later, I stood in my office at the Wellington Foundation, reviewing applications for our newest initiative, emergency medical assistance for families facing sudden health crises. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now the one deciding who needed help, who deserved support, who was worth investing in. The work was everything Dean had promised. It was challenging, meaningful, and deeply fulfilling. In my first month alone, we helped 12 families avoid financial collapse from medical bills, funded advanced treatments for 3 patients their insurance had abandoned, and partnered with 4 regional hospitals to ensure no one was discharged without proper support. To my own surprise, I discovered I had a real talent for administration. Years of coordinating complex patient care had prepared me well. My nursing background earned trust from medical professionals, and my own experience with financial hardship helped me recognize which cases truly needed help. But the best part was working with Dean every day. He became more than my employer. He became my closest friend. We shared morning coffee, discussed foundation projects, talked about books and current events, and reflected on our pasts. He was thoughtful, sharp, and deeply kind, and I valued our friendship more than I could say. A soft knock came at my office door. Maxwell appeared, perfectly on time as always. "Mrs. Henderson, your 11 o'clock appointment has arrived." I checked my schedule. "The Harrison General Hospital consultation?" "Yes, ma'am. The administrator would like to discuss expanding the partnership program." I smiled as I gathered my files. Harrison General, my old hospital, where I had first met Dean all those years ago. It felt like a circle closing. Maxwell ushered in a woman in her mid-40s with tired but determined eyes, an expression I recognized well from my nursing days. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Sarah Martinez, Director of Patient Services at Harrison General. Thank you for meeting with me." We sat by the window as she opened a thick folder. "I have to admit," she said, shaking her head slightly, "when we first heard about the Wellington Foundation's program, it sounded almost unreal. But the results speak for themselves. The impact you've had is remarkable." Over the past 6 months, we had placed patient advocates, many of them retired nurses, in 8 regional hospitals. They worked directly with families to navigate insurance barriers, secure continued care, and prevent patients from being lost in paperwork and red tape. "It's been very successful," I said, "but it only works when hospital leadership is fully committed." "Oh, we are," Sarah replied quickly. "We've seen too many families destroyed by medical debt. What you're offering is what healthcare should be." We spent the next hour discussing logistics, staffing, and funding. 6 months earlier, the conversation would have intimidated me. Now, it energized me. As Sarah stood to leave, she paused. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Were you ever a nurse at Harrison General? Your name sounds familiar, and your approach it feels familiar too." "I was," I said. "I worked there for 12 years before the downsizing in 2018. Her face lit up. "I thought so. I was new then, but I remember hearing about a nurse who always went the extra mile. People talked about how you stayed late, how you never gave up on difficult cases." Warmth spread through my chest. After all these years, I was remembered not for what I lacked, but for what I gave. "That's very kind of you," I said. "It's not kindness," she replied. "It's the truth. And now I see why the Wellington Foundation works so well. You brought the same heart from bedside care into leadership." After she left, I sat quietly, watching snow begin to fall again outside my window. In a few hours, Dean and I would have our weekly dinner, something we'd started after my first week at the foundation. Tonight, we were planning our first annual fundraising gala, an event that would allow us to expand our programs even further. My phone buzzed with a message. I glanced at it, expecting work-related news, but instead saw Trent's name. "Mom, Miranda and I were wondering if you'd like to come to dinner this weekend. Tommy's been asking about his grandmother." I stared at the message for a long moment. Over the past 6 months, Trent's calls had become more frequent. His tone had shifted from concern to curiosity to something close to respect. He had learned my job was real, my life stable, and that I was no longer the struggling woman he had once taken for granted. Miranda had even called once, claiming she wanted to catch up, though I suspected she was more interested in my new circumstances. The truth was, I could afford generosity now. I could afford to let go of old hurts and decide on my own terms what kind of relationship I wanted moving forward. Dean had taught me that holding on to resentment only harms the person carrying it. But over the past 6 months, I had learned something just as important. I no longer needed anyone else's approval to feel worthy. Their acceptance might be nice, but it wasn't necessary for my happiness. I typed back a careful reply. "That sounds lovely. Let me check my schedule and get back to you." It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't the eager, grateful yes I would have sent 6 months earlier either. I had learned to value my own time, my own energy, and to make choices based on what I wanted, not on what others expected of me. A knock on my office door pulled me from my thoughts. Dean appeared, leaning casually against the frame, Charlie sitting proudly at his side. "How did the Harrison General meeting go?" he asked. "Very well," I said. "They're excited about expanding the partnership, and Sarah Martinez remembered me from my nursing days. She said the staff used to talk about my patient care." Dean smiled with unmistakable pride. "Of course they did. You were probably the best nurse they ever had." "I don't know about that," I said softly. "I do," he replied, taking a seat. Charlie immediately curled up in his favorite spot under the window. Dean's tone shifted, more serious now. "Flora, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." A flutter of nerves ran through me. "What is it?" "The foundation has grown faster than I ever imagined," he said. "In just 6 months, we've gone from a small local effort to a regional organization making real change." He leaned forward. "But to take the next step, to become truly national, we need to restructure." My heart dropped. Was I being replaced? Had I failed somehow? "I want to promote you to executive director," Dean continued calmly. "Full authority over foundation operations. You'd be my partner, not my employee." I stared at him, stunned. "Dean, I couldn't possibly—" "Yes, you could," he said without hesitation. "You've proven yourself again and again. You understand this work better than anyone. Hospitals trust you, and most importantly, you care about this mission as deeply as I do." He smiled slightly. "And since I own the foundation, the board will support whatever I recommend. I've also been thinking about stepping back traveling, maybe writing a book. I can only do that knowing the foundation is in the right hands. The weight of his words hit me all at once. Executive director. A national foundation. The chance to help not dozens, but thousands of families. The salary would be $12,000 a month, he added gently, plus benefits, a car allowance, and the foundation would purchase the house you're living in and put it in your name. $12,000 a month. The house would be mine. At 68, I was being offered security and purpose beyond anything I had ever imagined. "Dean," I said, my voice thick, "why are you doing this? You've already given me so much." He looked out the window at the softly falling snow before answering. "Because 15 years ago, a nurse sat beside my hospital bed and convinced me my life still mattered. She saw something in me I couldn't see myself, and she refused to give up." He turned back to me, eyes shining. "Now I see something in you that you may not fully see yet. You don't just help people, Flora, you change lives." I thought about the broken man in room 412. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago, dismissed, invisible, quietly fading, and I thought about all the families who could be helped if the foundation grew even further. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and strong. "Yes, I'll take the position." Dean's face lit up. "Welcome to your new life, Executive Director Henderson." As the sun set over the snowy garden, I realized something profound. My real life was just beginning. At 68, I had found not just work, but purpose, not just stability, but joy, not just a house, but a home where I was valued for who I was, not for what I could give. Charlie stretched, patted over, and rested his head on my lap. I stroked his ears, thinking about how everything had begun, with a lost dog, a diamond collar, and a simple act of kindness on a cold Christmas Eve. Sometimes miracles arrive disguised as ordinary moments, and sometimes the family that matters most isn't the one you're born into, but the one you choose. I learned what true wealth really is. Not money, not titles, but connection, purpose, love given and received. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly, completely rich. And it all started with sharing a sandwich with a stranger's dog. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever experienced something like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. And on the final screen, I'm leaving 2 more stories from this channel that I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you for staying with me until the end.